Hey, everybody. Welcome to our Monday night webinar. My name is Ben Jackson. For those of you who have not met me before, I am the co-founder of the nonprofit Upsolve, and we help people break free from their debt and restart their financial lives. And I do this work because about 8 years ago, I was drowning with $60,000 of credit card debt. And bankruptcy was the thing that put me back on my feet and put me on a path towards the middle class, doing work that I absolutely love. And so now I've dedicated my life and my career to helping other people do the same, and co-founded the nonprofit Upsolve to make that super easy for you to do. So if you're on this webinar, maybe you are struggling with debt, maybe somebody you know is struggling with debt and you want to try to help them. Our goal tonight is to talk about what bankruptcy is, how you can go through that, some of the misconceptions about Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and then answer your questions as we go. So I have some general topics that I've been thinking through that I would love to chat about. But if you have questions as we're talking, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll answer them as they come up. And if you've been on before, you'll notice I'm in a different setting than before. I'm not wearing an Upsolve shirt. Shocking. I'm actually at our downtown office. I'm excited to be with you all here tonight. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about who it is that qualifies for Chapter 7 bankruptcy first, what the income limits look like. And let's talk about the exact steps for filing without hiring a super expensive attorney. We'll talk about what happens to your stuff in bankruptcy. We'll talk about your credit score impact and your financial future. And we'll talk about mistakes that you absolutely must avoid if you're filing bankruptcy. And we'll talk about how our free platform can walk you through this process from start to finish without the cost of an attorney. So let's look at the first one. Who is it that actually qualifies for Chapter 7 bankruptcy? So starting with the basics, Chapter 7 bankruptcy is meant for people who can't afford to repay their debts. So it's not for people that it's like, kind of a little bit hard. Maybe we're not, able to spend the money that we would like to spend apart from our debts. This is for people who are really struggling, who tend to be falling behind, just like I was, where my debt was growing because of the interest faster than I could pay it off, and it didn't matter what I did. And Chapter 7 is a provision of US law that essentially says that when you get in a circumstance like that, you can get a fresh start. You're entitled to start over, and that's something that we do differently in America than in some other countries where you might have things like debt peonage or prisons or things like that. So if you find yourself in a circumstance like that, what the law says is that you can ask a court for a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. If you are able to prove that you really need that your debt outpaces your ability to pay it, you can get that fresh start and you can get what's called unsecured debt totally wiped out, totally taken care of. So what does that mean? What is unsecured debt versus secured debt? So secured debts are things like a home or a car loan, something where you told the bank, hey, I'm buying this thing. I want you to give me the money. I'll pay you that money back. But if I don't pay it back, you can take the thing or take some portion of the thing. That's very different than what happens with bankruptcy. In Chapter 7 bankruptcy, the unsecured debt is what's wiped out, and the secured debt will in most instances continue. If you're working with Upsolve, it will definitely continue unless you reaffirm it or give up the car loan, let's say, for example, the car loan. So unsecured debt would be things like credit card debt. So things where you pay for things with it, but you don't necessarily give the bank that gave you the card the right to, say, take back the TV that you bought on that loan. It's unsecured. It's only secured by the interest that you pay and your promise to repay it. So in Chapter 7 bankruptcy, typically any qualified unsecured debts will be wiped out when you file. Secured debts will survive past bankruptcy. So if you have lots of secured debt, if you're really struggling with it, typically you can apply for a Chapter 7 bankruptcy as long as you can pass what's called the means test, MEANS. So means test is a test that the government establishes that says, okay, based on your income level, how much money do you have to have left over after your expenses in different parts of the country in order to be considered to need a bankruptcy? So this is going to vary in various places, but if you pass the means test for your state, meaning the amount that you have left over after you pay your expenses, your essential expenses, is less than a certain amount, you'll often be able to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy to get rid of that unsecured debt. And again, the income thresholds for this vary state by state and by household size. But this is something, if you are interested in bankruptcy, the Upsolve tool can kind of help you figure out, like, hey, do I qualify? Do I pass the means test? Can I get out of my debt through Chapter 7 bankruptcy. So let's say you determine you can file, right? Like you want to get out of debt with Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Can you do it on your own? When I was struggling with debt, I thought that I needed to work with a lawyer. So I went to find a lawyer. I looked him up online. I did some, like Google research, like, oh, is this lawyer good? Who knows? And what I found was, one, it's really hard to find a lawyer in many instances. And, I didn't know this at the time. Not all lawyers do bankruptcy, right? So you have to find somebody who does bankruptcy. And I certainly couldn't afford it, right? Like this lawyer that I ended up talking with wanted to charge me $3,000. And if I had $3,000, I wouldn't need to file bankruptcy. So I was in a position when I was looking for a lawyer where I really, really couldn't afford to move forward with one, even when I found one. So if you're like me, you're probably wondering, can I do this on my own? And you absolutely can. Just like most legal processes, there's a version of them called pro se, meaning on your own without a lawyer. And the US law allows you to do that in, I believe, every legal circumstance. You can do something on your own. There's different questions of, is it, safe for you to do it on your own? Is it smart? And bankruptcy is definitely something that you can. And I'm living proof of that. I filed my bankruptcy on my own. It took me a long time. I made a lot of mistakes, but ultimately I got a fresh start without the high cost of a lawyer. So we at Upsolve have made it very easy. We take all the questions that you have to answer. We ask you them, we help you understand them, we help you make sure that you've answered all of them so that you don't leave anything blank. And then we take those answers and we put them on the required forms for your state. We give them to you and we give you detailed instructions so that you can take those to the court and file that Chapter 7 bankruptcy without a lawyer. So you absolutely can do it without a lawyer. There is a process that you'll need to walk through, and our tool at upsolve.org can help you do that and help you do it for free. So another question that I very often get is, what happens to the things that I own and to my credit when I file bankruptcy? And this is a great question. So I was wondering before I filed if I was going to lose some, family heirlooms, like things that weren't worth a lot of money, but that had a lot of value to me. Like I had an old watch from my grandfather, and I was like, oh man, it would really, really stink if I was going to lose this thing in the bankruptcy. It didn't have a lot of value, but it had a lot of sentimental value. And so I was worried that I was going to lose that. I was also worried that I would never be able to buy a house someday, right? Like, does bankruptcy tank my credit? Is no one going to be willing to give me a loan in the future? I need to know this, right? Like, that's important stuff you need to know if you want to live in America. And so I wanted to make sure that if I did file bankruptcy, I was not going to be in a position where someday I couldn't get a house. And long story very short, didn't lose my grandfather's watch that had sentimental value, didn't totally destroy my credit. It actually improved my credit, which is something a lot of people don't realize. A lot of people will have a credit boost after they file because very often their credit's in the tank already, right? Like you've already been falling behind, your credit score's probably fallen. And as soon as that bad debt goes away, it can raise up pretty quickly, which is what happened with me. So in many instances, you don't lose your property and your credit bounces back. Now, there's a specific, just talking about that first one, property that you can and can't keep. There's a process called, or a tool, I should say, called bankruptcy exemptions, which are parts of the bankruptcy law that vary, again, state by state. There are federal exemptions and state exemptions that determine how much value you can protect. Meaning, let's say, for example, I have a car that's worth $3,000 and I'm filing bankruptcy and I want to know, okay, am I going to lose this specific piece of property? All right, like maybe Ben didn't lose his grandfather's watch, but will he lose this specific piece of property? And what is happening in a bankruptcy proceeding is the court appoints someone called a trustee, and that trustee is responsible for looking at your property and saying, okay, what of this could we take to sell to pay off their debt? So we can do that first, and then we can clear the rest of it through the bankruptcy process, right? And it makes sense, right? Like they're trying to be fair. They're trying to say, okay, do you have something you could give up in exchange for this fresh start? Now, the exemptions, what those do is they say there are certain values for certain things that we believe are essential. Things like clothes, things like, precious family heirlooms, like I mentioned, dishes, things you might own that have other value, bedding, et cetera, cars. There are certain values of those things that we say, okay, the law is going to protect that amount for you. And we're going to say you can't take anything below that amount. So if that value is $3,000 for a car and your car is worth $2,000, the trustee can't take that car. But if your car was worth $10,000, let's say, they might be able to take that car and sell it and get $7,000 while you keep the $3,000 that's covered by the exemptions. So that's kind of how bankruptcy exemptions work. And if you have more questions about them, I don't have time to go into all the detail on this call. You can check out our upsolve.org articles. You can just search Upsolve bankruptcy exemptions and find information there. As long as your property is protected by an exemption, which the Upsolve tool can help you figure out, it will almost always be protected in that bankruptcy proceeding. Okay, so we talked about exemptions, we talked about assets, we talked about credit. There are things on the subject of credit. Post-bankruptcy, even if your credit does take a hit, because that does happen for some people, their credit score does go down a little bit. If your credit takes a hit, the good news is there are things you can do pretty quickly to boost that credit up after bankruptcy. One thing you can do is called rent reporting. And what this is, if you're like many people, like me, when I filed bankruptcy, you pay rent. That rent typically doesn't get reported to the credit bureau, right? Which seems kind of crazy, right? Like I pay my credit card, the credit bureau knows that, it impacts my credit score. I pay rent every month and my rent is expensive. Like, why doesn't that go to the credit bureaus as proof that I'm creditworthy? Well, you can actually do it yourself. There are ways you can do this through the credit bureaus. There are services like Kickoff is one. I believe Self Credit has something like this. And what happens is you report on a monthly basis that you've paid your rent, you've paid it on time. That goes to the credit bureaus and that helps boost your score. You can also do things called credit builder loans or secured credit cards. And the way these things work, in many instances, it's like you're taking a loan from yourself. You put up a certain amount of money and you can borrow against that money and repay from that money every single month. And this will get reported. You know, it's something that banks will often do because they'll say, okay, maybe I don't want to lend Ben money, right? Like he just filed bankruptcy. He's a little bit of a risk. But if he's willing to do this, put up the money himself, I will report those payments to the credit bureau to show that he's good at paying back the things that he borrows until he gets to the point where we say, okay, now his credit score qualifies him for good credit. And I did that post-bankruptcy as well. I was able to boost my credit score up from about, I think it was about 550 or so at the time that I filed, to over 700 within just like 2 years post-bankruptcy by being on time with my credit payments ongoing, getting a credit builder loan, doing rent reporting, those types of things. So if you're concerned about your credit post-bankruptcy, don't worry. There is absolutely hope, and even hope to the point where you can get a house, which is what I was worried about. Today, I have a beautiful home that I love. I'm able to, have my family out there, and I got it at a mortgage rate that made sense, that wasn't crazy. And I never thought that was going to happen to me before I filed bankruptcy because I thought, oh, this is going to destroy my credit forever, and it didn't. So bankruptcy, it can be great because it can wipe that debt out, but there are actually like a lot of really unexpected benefits that people don't realize that bankruptcy has. For many people, myself included, getting out of debt through bankruptcy isn't just about clearing debt. It's about restoring your peace of mind because debt weighs on you, like it really does. There's that old line, I think it's Kanye song or something like that. I'm sorry to bring Kanye into the webinar, but it's that line that having money ain't everything, not having it is. And if you've ever struggled with debt, that is real, right? Like that sense of, oh my God, how am I going to pay my bills this month? You work, you worry that an emergency might be around the corner because you're just scraping by. That takes a toll. That really takes a toll. And there's even a lot of evidence in studies that have shown recently that if you have that weight on your shoulders, it makes it harder to make good financial decisions. And I remember when I was struggling with debt, I would go out and work, 30, 40, 50 hours, actually way more than that. Sorry, I would go out and work like 12-hour days, right? So we're talking over the course of a week, 60, 70 hours. And I would get done with these long shifts and I'd be like, man, I'm just exhausted. Like, I deserve to go out and, get a treat or something just to feel a little bit better, like go get a Starbucks, whatever it is. And, you should be able to treat yourself for things, but I couldn't afford to do that. And it was really hard for me to say no to those things because it just sucked having all this weight. Like I needed something that wasn't just the weight of my debt on my shoulders to feel better. And, it wasn't the smartest decision. Also, driving Uber and Lyft wasn't really the best thing for me. Like it wasn't paying my bills, but I couldn't get myself to do anything else because I was just living check to check. Sure, should have gone back to school, should have studied hard, move forward, but I couldn't afford to do it, one. And I couldn't get the mental space, like the head space to do it because I was always serving my debt, always just trying to make ends meet. And the really cool thing that happened to me with bankruptcy that I see happen with lots and lots of people that we work with at Upsolve is as soon as that debt was gone, that weight off my shoulders, oh my God, I was immediately able to start thinking about my financial future, making really good decisions, budgeting, planning, sticking to it because I wasn't always stressed out by my money. And that was ultimately what put me on the path to success, to getting into the middle class and to having the life that I have today. Bankruptcy can help you improve your mental health because it removes that stress. It can free up your income so you can actually afford rent, food, and essentials. And by the way, every now and then those Starbucks drinks that you want to get. And it can give you the emotional and financial space to plan for your future. And that is gold. Now, it does all these great things for you, but there's a lot of shame around bankruptcy in our culture, right? Like there's this sense that, and maybe you felt this, maybe you haven't, I certainly did. There's this sort of like Dave Ramsey style shame around debt, which is if you are in debt, it's because you did something wrong to get here, or you're the type of person who can't control themselves. Or, if we get you out of debt, it doesn't solve the underlying problem because you're just going to get back in. And I'm here to tell you that is 100% false. Sure, there are some people who need to learn a lesson. Yeah, of course, we all do. Like there's been things that I've done in my life that are foolish where I really needed to hit the bottom to move forward. But most of the time, debt, if you're somebody who's working hard, who's trying to get out of it, who's trying to make ends meet, that's not you, right? Like you're not the person who's struggling with that. And bankruptcy is really honestly nothing to be ashamed of. It's in the US law for a reason, because we know that the way our country works, the way that our economy works, people are going to end up in debt. And that debt can get out of control really quickly. There's data that shows that something on the order of like 90% of bankruptcies are preceded by things that are out of your control, right? Like maybe you got divorced, maybe you lost your job, maybe you had a health emergency that you weren't planning for. And if you're living check to check, if you're right on the edge, it doesn't matter how hard you work, right? It doesn't matter how much you save. It doesn't matter how many second jobs you take out. If you have an emergency that's big enough, that debt can get out of control and it can snowball quickly to the point where you just can't handle it. And bankruptcy is there for that. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's a tool that you can use to reclaim your dignity, to make sure that your hard work actually matters, and to get to the really cool point, which is where you can start to make your money work for you, which can never happen when your money's only making the credit card company's interest. Okay, so let me see if I have any questions here coming in from the audience. Give me just 1 second. Pull this open. If you do have any questions about bankruptcy, about Upsolve, anything, throw them in the chat. We'll answer them here as we go. All right, so a couple questions have come in here. Let me drop this one in the chats. Will I lose my car or home when I file bankruptcy? I have a 2-monitor setup going on here. It's not my normal one, so give me a second to find this. There we go. So will I lose my car or my home when I file bankruptcy? So this is an important question, right? Like I needed my car because I was an Uber driver. And if I lose my car, this is not good, right? Like now I don't have any way to make money. So if you file bankruptcy, you want to understand, like, am I going to keep it? And most of the time, the value of people's cars is less than the exemption value for their state, meaning, their car might be worth $3,000, the exemption covers $6,000. That was the case for me. Now, let's say it doesn't, right? Like, let's say that your car is worth more than the exemption amounts. Well, in some instances, you might end up in a circumstance where the trustee is going to take that car and sell it to pay off the debt. But if you're like me and you need the car, so this is exactly the circumstance that I was in, my car was worth less than I owed on it, and the exemption amount was also less than I owed on it. So I was worried I was going to lose it. There's a process called reaffirmation. And what you can do with this is you can say, okay, I'm current on my loan. I would like to keep paying on this loan after bankruptcy and keep this car so I can do my work. It's a pretty cut and dried process. You can do it. I did it. That allows you to often keep your car in bankruptcy, even if it's worth more than the exemption amount will cover. Now, homes, it's a little bit different. Typically, if you have a home, it's best for you to work with a lawyer. There are homestead exemptions. There are values of homes that are covered as well. When you have a really big asset like that, it's important to think carefully about it because one, you live there. You don't want to lose it because you could end up out on the street. And two, there's a lot of money at play. So if that's you, if you're wondering about this, I would definitely suggest try to get a free consultation from an attorney, see what you can do to protect that home. Upsolve can actually help you get connected to an attorney. You can just go to upsolve.org. You can start our screener and you can say, hey, I want to talk to a lawyer. Okay, can I include credit card, medical, or payday loan debt in my bankruptcy? Also a great question. So credit cards, definitely. Those credit cards are unsecured. Medical debt, typically you can as well. Payday loans, typically you can as well. So the things that you can't are going to be things like child support, back alimony, some types of judgments. There are certain rules about what can and can't be included. The Upsolve tool will help you with that as well. How long does the process typically take? That's a really good question. It depends on if you're doing it on your own, if you're doing it with a lawyer, or if you're doing it with Upsolve. So it took me about 6 months to get my bankruptcy forms done. And that was because it is painfully hard to find the forms that you need in many instances. I fumbled around for a long time on court websites, finally got the right forms, did them. From the time that I filed, though, until the time that I got my discharge, was about 3 months. And what we typically see for people is about 3 to 6 months. If your case is straightforward, you don't have assets, you're honest on your forms, you get everything in right away, usually about 3 to 6 months later, you'll have that fresh start. I love this question. So this person's saying, I can't copy paste it over here, so I'm going to type it up. Will everybody know that I filed? So this is big. I thought a lot about this. Even if you believe that there's no shame in bankruptcy, is everybody else going to believe that? Maybe not. I don't know. I've found when I talk to people about it, people tend to say, okay, that's really cool. It's a great story. They share their stories, which helps reduce the shame. But, some people still don't think kindly of it, right? Like some people still have a negative opinion. Just go search on YouTube for bankruptcy, and I'm sure you'll hear anything about this. So will people know about it, though, when you file? Bankruptcy records are public, but you got to look kind of hard for them. And as I like to say, like if you have friends that are looking at your bankruptcy records, you might need different friends. Most people are not going to just stumble across it, right? Like they're not going to like open up a newspaper or like jump on TikTok or whatever and see that Ben Jackson filed bankruptcy. No, it doesn't happen like that. Also, people might be worried about whether a job will find out about it. I definitely was. I hoped someday, once I got out of debt and back on my feet, that I could go to law school. And typically, I was worried, like, are they going to find out about this? Most jobs don't do the type of background check that will find a bankruptcy. They will show up on certain background checks, but generally speaking, it's something you have to do as an exception to look for financial history on those background checks. So for most people, it doesn't show up on your job applications. You don't end up having to explain it to everybody you meet in the future. Okay, let's see what other questions we have here. How much does bankruptcy cost? This is a great question as well. So this also kind of depends. Typically what you're going to pay, and actually if you work with Upsolve, Upsolve is free, right? 100% free. We are sponsored by donors. We have foundations that help cover our costs to make sure we can offer those services for free. We make money on some referrals for people that are not a good fit for our tool. But bankruptcy with us is free. Preparing your forms, totally free. So here's what you do have to pay. You have to pay for a credit counseling course as part of the bankruptcy process. And if your income is below a certain level, you can usually get a waiver on that. Now that's around $50, depending upon where you go. You do also have to pay a court filing fee with your bankruptcy application, and this is $338. But this also has a fee waiver. So that's something that's a concern for you. If your income's below a certain amount, our tool will help you figure that out and also help you apply for that fee waiver. So what do I do if I don't qualify for bankruptcy? Yeah, so this can be a thing for people. So let's say, for example, you're using the Upsolve tool. And actually, let me go and do a quick screen share for you here on it, so I'll just show you what our tool looks like. So let's say you're in our tool and you want to take our screener. You get started. You say that you filed in the past 8 years. So you can only file bankruptcy within set periods of time. There's a difference for Chapter 13, Chapter 7, but for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, you can't have gotten a discharge within the last 7 years. You can't have filed a case, within the last 7 years. So if you said in the past 8 years, 8 years, my goodness, I can't talk tonight. So in the past 8 years, have you filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy? You say no, our screener continues. You say yes. We're going to indicate, hey, this is probably not a good option for you. It's been too soon since you filed in the past. So if this happens in our tool, you can click to get a free evaluation, talk to a bankruptcy lawyer. Well, let's find out you're not actually eligible to file right now. You're too soon from when you filed bankruptcy most recently. In that instance, you do have other options. So for debt relief, there's a couple things you can do. You can do what's called debt settlement, which is to negotiate with the people you owe money to and say, hey, I can't pay you $60,000. I can afford to pay $40,000. Would you take that money? Now, most of the time, you need to make a lump sum payment for settlement, which, if I had $40,000, maybe I could keep paying it off anyway. Like, why do I need to do this? So settlement, if you're really struggling, can often be hard to do, but it is an option. The other thing you can do is what's called a debt consolidation loan. So this would be to take out a loan at a lower interest rate than the other debt that you have to pay off that debt. The challenge with that is if you're struggling, your credit score is not great, you're probably not going to be able to get a better interest rate, so it won't work. So what we tend to see people who are really struggling do at Upsolve is either bankruptcy or do something called a debt management plan. And what a debt management plan is, this is where you work with an approved nonprofit who offers essentially like agreed payment plans. So they have relationships with Bank of America and they say, okay, if I can get Ben to sit down to make a budget, we can see in that budget how much room he has to pay off his debt. And I can get him to stick to a certain amount of payments. What will you work with me on this? Like what interest rate Bank of America would you be comfortable taking for this debt that's less than what he currently pays? And to the banks, it's valuable because they know, oh, Ben's less likely to default. He's got this guidance. He's got this budgeting process, and he's got reduced interest. And to you, it's valuable because you just end up paying less. So those can work out great in a debt management plan if that's something that's a good fit for you and you don't qualify for bankruptcy. And other people, that don't qualify for bankruptcy, don't want that. People definitely can grind it out, make a budget, pay off their debt, but it can be really difficult. Okay. Will bankruptcy stop my collection calls? Yep, absolutely. As soon as you file bankruptcy, something called the automatic stay goes into effect, and that requires debt collectors to stop calling you. Now, they don't necessarily always know, so if they continue calling you, you need to tell them like, hey, I filed bankruptcy as of this date, you're required to stop calling me, and then if they do continue calling you, then you could potentially have a lawsuit on your hands, and I would suggest reaching out to an attorney. All right. Question here from Doug S. Doug, let me get up to your question. If I apply and am approved for a waiver of the bankruptcy filing fee, do I have to start the actual filing process right away, or can I wait for a while? That's a great question, Doug. I actually don't know. I would be curious what is making you wait, though. If you get approved, you could be out of debt entirely in about 6 months. So if I were you, I would think, is it worth waiting, or should I just go for it right now since I got this waiver and I know it's not going to cost me money? The best way to find that out, how long that waiver lasts, actually would be to contact your bankruptcy court's clerk office. You can Google, where I live, bankruptcy clerk phone number, call that phone number and ask them if there's a timeline for approval. I've actually not had that question before, so I really appreciate that, Doug. I'll see if I can get you a more specific answer and get back to you on it. Thanks for the question. Anybody else have any questions? Feel free to drop them in the chat. We can take a couple more. Got a few minutes here on this Monday night. It's beautiful. I'm actually, I went down to our Boston office because I'm normally up in my house in New Hampshire recording. And it's so nice to be in Boston. I don't know if you've ever been in Boston in the early summer, late spring. It's just beautiful. It's a sunny day out here. Okay, what happens? Let me throw this in the chat so people can see it. What happens if I make a mistake on my forms? Great question. So the good news is with Upsolve, people tend to catch a lot of the mistakes that they make on their own. I made so many mistakes on my forms that I would have avoided had I worked with Upsolve. So most of the time, the bankruptcy clerks, the bankruptcy trustees are really nice. Like they're not out here to get you. They're not trying to find gotchas and say, haha, you forgot to put, a period at the end of the sentence. And so goodbye bankruptcy case. Like they're really here to help you. They know that it can be difficult to deal with legal processes on your own. And so they'll often say, like they did for me, like, hey, this is the wrong form. Maybe go and, replace it with this one. What you don't want to do is lie. So if you go on there and you say, I own a $40,000 car and I'm just not going to put it on the forms, that can really get you in trouble. You can end up not only not being able to file bankruptcy, but having a lawsuit for fraud. So definitely don't want to lie on your bankruptcy application. But common mistakes, if it's really bad, if it would really affect your case, there's a process to addend your filing, but that doesn't happen very often. Usually it's little things that the court clerks and trustees can help you correct. How does bankruptcy stop or hold eviction? This is also a great question. So timing in this is everything. Eviction proceedings are a lawsuit that is required to stop in the event of a bankruptcy. You'll sometimes need to notify the parties in the case, your landlord's attorney, or whatever, that bankruptcy is proceeding, but that will stop the eviction. Now, unfortunately, if there's an eviction order already, if the sheriff has that, they've been served, you've been served, you've gone through this process as an eviction order that the sheriff is now going to enforce, you may still end up evicted, but the proceedings do have to stop. So the important thing is, if you think that you're facing eviction, you've maybe just been served, or you are behind in your rent, whatever the case is, bankruptcy can be a quick way to stop those proceedings right away. But again, there are different parties to an eviction process. And so sometimes something may happen once it's out of the court's hands and into the sheriff's hands. But if you encounter the sheriff when there's an eviction order in place and you tell them, I'm filing bankruptcy, the next steps in the legal process might be a little bit different. Great question. So that's all the time we have for tonight. Thanks everybody for joining. It was really my pleasure to get to chat with you all. If you take away one thing from tonight and one thing only, let it be this. Bankruptcy was created to give people who are struggling with debt a way to get a fresh start. That's it. It's not a sign of laziness. It's not a sign of being irresponsible. It's not a sign that your financial life is over. It's a tool that exists that you can take advantage of when things get out of control, because that can happen. Happened to me, happens to the thousands and thousands of people that Upsolve have helped get out of debt. And here's the cool thing. Once you get out of debt, it becomes way easier to take advantage of the US economy. It becomes way easier to make good financial decisions, and it becomes way easier to build the life that you deserve to have. So if that's you or somebody you love, my hope for you is you'll be able to take advantage of Upsolve. Head over to upsolve.org, take our free screener, see if you're eligible, and get on your path to your fresh start. Thanks again for joining. Look forward to seeing you all again next Monday for another webinar. Tell your friends, family, anybody you think would help. Have an awesome